Hi, everyone. Welcome to the end of week 4, and boy, is it gorgeous weather out there. We are at record temperatures here in Minnesota, and as soon as I'm done recording this and posting it, I'm going to take my little dog for a walk in the spring-like temperatures. Um, so here we are at the end of week 4, just on the other side of halfway through the class. Can you believe it? We've only got 3 weeks left. And either you're working on and going to submit, or you already have submitted your parent interview papers, and I'm really looking forward to reading them. I really appreciate the intentional, very thoughtful way that you have been working on this. A number of you have posted questions, and watching chat last week in the groups, and then reading your reflection papers. I know that doing these interviews has been a wonderful opportunity for you to immerse yourself in a family and have an opportunity to apply a lot of what we've been reading about and talking about so far in the class. So I am really looking forward to reading them, and I hope my tips that I posted about writing the paper were helpful to you. And so tomorrow begins week 5. And, in the first few weeks in the class, we have been talking about families, about family structures and family differences. What is family? How is family defined? What does family look like? How do we look at family well-being in terms of processes and dynamics, communication between us? What are family roles? Gender differences and role expectations, things like that. And definitely looking at culture and family differences, and how every family has strengths, every family is faced with challenges, and our primary focus as professionals is supporting every family towards their well-being. So now looking forward, what we're going to do is look outside the family. And this week we've got a whole lot of content that we're covering in the readings, a lot of different concepts, but all very related to the idea of outside influences on families, and how those outside influences play a part in family well-being and the dynamics of families. And so the one of the conceptual frameworks about human development that I use consistently in my work, and will be touched on somewhat, although we're not doing one reading about it, is Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. That, here's a picture of it. Here's this is like the famous picture of Bronfenbrenner's model that you may have seen, or some adaptation of it. But the idea of these various settings, and with the individual at the center, and then depending on the location and membership in those settings, the type of influence that it would have on the individual. So around the individual would be the microsystems, or very close-in settings, intimate relationships, my going to work every day, my living with the same family members every day. Those are microsystem influences. And when I interact as an individual with one, or when I interact with 2 of those or more, that's what's called a mesosystem interaction. An exosystem interaction, so that something I may not have, I don't have direct contact with, but something in my nearby world that can affect me. And for instance, it could be friends of a family member, right? And so something's happening in my my husband's family that is affecting them, that affects him, that affects me, but it may not affect me directly. And then the most outer ring is called the macro system, and things in the macro system could be a public policy, right? Something that, again, doesn't have a direct impact on us, but definitely affects our outside world, that then affects what happens to us. Could be something in the mass media, right? Messages in the mass media. So just touching on that, a very brief, but as we go through these different external influences on families, we can situate them in Bronfenbrenner's ecological perspective and sort of understand about stresses and strengths and resources within our system that help us manage these various external influences. So, for instance, we will be looking at stress, for instance, this week as obviously as a factor of from in the family, but not just stress, but external factors bringing about stress. And one of the papers, one of the things that we're looking at is the difference between stress as a major incident or a major event, right? And we can think of a major stressor in our lives. Somebody has a car accident, there's an acute illness, something like that, you know, a major stressor, or daily hassles, right? Those little things we always deal with, traffic jams, being late to work, snowfalls, whatever, that pile up, right? And still have an impact on us as family members and how we deal with those stresses. Speaking of stresses, we'll also be reading in the textbook about family economics, family finances, certainly as a source of stress, and family decision making around around finances, and which relate to a couple other factors we'll be looking at. One is work-family balance and the choice around work or lack of choice, the obligation, the responsibility around work. You know, thinking about do both parents work, or is it actually cheaper for one of the parents not to work because childcare is so expensive, right? And if if we have individual choice around working, then shouldn't we have our public policies to support us in those choices? So, for instance, shouldn't childcare be more available to us if both family members, both adults, either choose to work or have to work, right? So, so work-family balance. Another economic factor that certainly is a major influence on families is poverty. The strain of living in poverty, living in poverty as even as a culture, right? The culture of living in poverty and survival, and resources that family members use to survive and to thrive within living in poverty. So economics, poverty, work-family balance, the decision around work, things like that. When we think about policies that are out there that support families or that influence family life, for instance, again, the availability of childcare, work-family leave, things like that, we can also look at policies as a macro system influence that provides a message about families or a message about parenting. It provides a message about the importance of working, or it provides a message about the importance of quality child care for children, for instance. So if our federal government, if our state governments, our local governments put resources into making child care available, that sends a very clear message about value. And I mention this because the Sussman-Stillman paper is looking at ecological influences on parents, mothers, and infants. And one of our discussion questions talks about what is information and messages and influences on that mother-child bond. And so I'd like you to be thinking about both those nearby, those proximal influences, resources, supports, for the mother and the child, but then wider out, more distal supports and influences, such as media messages about caregiving. There was that, I think it was Dove or Similac, the commercial a couple of years ago, where they had sort of these warring factions of different types of mothers that were there, sort of this turf war at the playground between the working mothers in their business suits and the baby wearer mothers, right? And so what does mass media messages about mothering and having an infant, what might that do to an individual parent's sense of confidence, right? Their belief in themselves, just things like that. So, looking at, so again, all of these, whole variety of these external influences you know, again, poverty, financial influences, the nearby influences, wider influences, and then finally there's the dimension of time. And the Carrie Daly paper is looking at time as an influence. And here we think of time as a commodity. Certainly when families are stressed, work-family balance, there never seems to be enough time. How you manage time, how you budget time, having quality time, doing family dinner time, and how families spend time. But also the idea, and if we look back at Bronfenbrenner's model, right, is the idea, the Chronos system. So we have these sense of these people and places and physical settings on levels, but there and these systems, but also there's the sense of time. And certainly, for instance, my parents growing up in the Depression, that event had an impact on them. I'm a baby boomer, right? So growing up, when I grew up, had an impact on me. We talk now about Gen X parents and millennial parents, people who were influenced by 9/11, right? So we also think of time as a system that has an influence on us depending on what is going on in our world, and the passage of time. That certainly as a family, who we are 20 years ago is very different than who we are today. Developmentally, our members change. We, you know, structurally we may change. We may be in different family configurations. We may be in different family locations. We certainly age. That's a factor that happens over time. And there may be events that affect us. So, so we'll also be thinking about the dynamic of time as a commodity, as a phenomenon, but also as it affects us over the passage of time. So much content, and our discussion questions in our chat will be touching on those. And so then this week as we go forward, we'll have our chat. One thing, or a discussion, one thing to keep in mind is that we do have new discussion group configurations. I've just changed things up a little bit, so you're talking to some people are the same, some people are a little bit different. And then chat 2 will be actually, I'm going to let you, or I'm going to ask you to vote on how you want to do chat this week. You know, last week we were in 3 small groups, and you know, we could have chat in 2 groups. And if that seems easier to you, I can facilitate a single group like we did before. You know, maybe maybe in week 6 or 7, we might try chat through Google Hangout. But for this week, now that we're on sort of the flip side of the 7 weeks, let me know how you would like to do chat. If you want to do it again all as one group, or you want to be in 2 separate groups, and I'll set that up. Maybe I'll set up a little poll and you can weigh in. So, oh, and then finally, to end the week on Friday, the next Friday, will be a reflection paper over weeks 4 and 5. So this week, tonight, just the interview paper, and then next week discussion, chat, and the reflection paper as usual. So that's it. Thank you all very, very much. I hope you're enjoying the class as much as I am. You're a phenomenal group, and I, you know, again, so appreciate the time and investment and care and respect and consideration that you give to each other in the discussions. You really are a great learning community. So that's it. Have a fabulous weekend. I hope you all can enjoy this gorgeous weather wherever you are. Okay, bye.